You just never know where God is schooling you for something very, very important. And it may seem small and insignificant now and will be used wonderfully in the years to come.
How should Christians deal with the increasing sense of emptiness and hopelessness that characterizes much of today's world? As society moves away from objective truth and meaning, the need for a God-centered worldview becomes even more urgent. In this two-part series on light and truth, John Piper talks about how Francis Schaeffer tackled this kind of despair by pointing people to the reality of God and showing how faith and reason work together. In this episode, John Piper begins with an overview of Schaeffer's life. The seminar was originally delivered at Bethlehem Baptist Church on March 6, 1991.
Well, Francis Schaeffer tonight. So let me tell you a little bit about my personal contact with Francis Schaeffer, just to give you a connection for why he's significant in my life. Fall of 1965. In fact, if you read the chapter, there was a reference to Wheaton College and some lectures he gave there. I can see exactly where I was sitting as a sophomore at Wheaton in 1965, and I can picture him. I was very near the back, and therefore he's sort of a haze, but his hair was longish, though not nearly as long as on the front of this book. As he got older, his hair got longer, unlike most people, goes the other direction. But it was longish, beetle-like hair in those days, and he wore knickers, and he wore a coat with no collar on it. And so he looked real different, cool, I thought. This is neat. And I didn't understand a word he said, I don't think. That's what all the students at Wheaton thought. This was just wonderful. This must be good because we don't understand it. I asked Noelle, she was a freshman, if she remembered, and she doesn't remember him, but she remembers Edith because she was there and met with the women in the dormitories. And she can remember one. And I said, do you remember what she talked about? And she said, no, but I think in reading now Hidden Art, that's probably what she was talking about. These are the 4 books that we have from Edith Schaeffer. This one right here, Hidden Art. It's basically how to make everyday life beautiful, how to make everyday life into an artistic expression, from meals, painting, sketching, decorating, etc., and so on. Just exciting to see the humdrum life that we all live turned into art. What is a Family? Edith Schaeffer, author of L'Abri. The most recent one, I think, I'm not sure, The Tapestry, big, fat book, The Life and Times of Francis and Edith Schaeffer by Edith Schaeffer, since he has died in 1984. This is the one that written in 1969, that introduced the world in a book form to L'Abri, which was the place where they worked for 20 years or so over in Switzerland. So you can look at those afterwards if you want. But so Noelle remembered her, but not him. I was deeply impressed, and I think I probably understood more than I remember understanding. And I'll talk more about what he did there in Wheaton, because it became the book, The God Who Is There, I believe. That was it. I had one other contact in person, and that was, I think I was probably a senior this time. I had heard the year before John Warwick Montgomery debate Altizer, the God is dead theologian, at the University of Chicago. And Montgomery slaughtered Altizer as far as the debate went. And he lost it because he slaughtered him. Meaning his attitude, his logic and his words were compelling, and his attitude was so caustic that he lost the war. He won the battle and lost the war. That was the feeling I came away with. And I kind of felt good that Christianity won. Intellectually, it won. I mean, Altizer, his philosophy about God being dead just was a muddle-headed thing. But I felt alienated from the Christian spokesman. So I said, boy, that's not the way I want to do debate, you know. Well, the next year, Francis Schaeffer debated Bishop Pike. Remember back in those days that Pike was saying all kinds of crazy things. And so there was this debate, and I went. 2,500 people on a winter night were there, and Schaeffer just stunned me in the way he debated this man. Because when he spoke, his words were clear and compelling. But it was manifest that he cared about this man's soul. I mean, it almost made you uneasy that he loves this man. He wants this man to be saved. So he won both ways that night, and won me especially in the way he carried on the debate. So I have only had good feelings about Francis Schaeffer. I've held him in a kind of awe, and it's been a little bit of a grief to me that in the latter years of his life, he has come into pretty serious conflict with people I admire in the evangelical world, because his ministry did become a lot more controversial in the last 5 years of his life. Let's begin, just kind of walk through an outline of his life here. I just have notes and a little pauses here and there with lessons that I am gleaning as I read about him. Everything he wrote is here in these 5 volumes, published by Crossway, the collected works, the complete works of Francis Schaeffer. So if you wanted everything in one set of books, there they are. He was born in 1912 and passed away in 1984 down here in Rochester of lymphoma cancer, and Edith Schaeffer still lives down there, I believe. His parents were of working class, which is interesting because he became so intellectually oriented himself. They were not believers. They went to some kind of liberal church, he said, that didn't give answers to his questions. And he was intending to move towards an engineering career. I think it's interesting how God, through what looked like a fluke, began to turn him toward a philosophical orientation, towards thought and life, because he was working on a fish wagon, it said, and one of the responsibilities he had was to teach English to a Russian. And the book chosen by the Russian was a Greek philosophy book. And so to teach English to this Russian, he was reading this classic book, and it became interesting to him. And as he grew in his interest of foundational classic Greek books, he said, well, the Bible is an important book in American culture. I should read the Bible. And when he was 18, he read the Bible and for 6 months struggled with answers that it was giving and was converted, evidently without anybody's external help. September 3rd, 1930, at the age of 18, he wrote, "All truth is from the Bible." So he was converted through his own investigation, so it seems. He headed for Drexel in Philadelphia to become an engineer, and God's call was so heavily upon him that he went to Hampton-Sydney, a college in Virginia, which has a Presbyterian religious connection. One of the things he did, he was a Yankee down there, and he was born in Germantown, Pennsylvania, and I grew up in South Carolina, and my cousin was from Reading, Pennsylvania, and I was a rebel and he was a Yankee, and I would wave my rebel flag and he would talk in funny accents, and we would fight the Civil War every time we got together. So when he said here, it was not easy to be a Yankee at Hampton-Sydney in Virginia, I knew exactly what he meant. And probably he did what maybe, I don't know how many of the others wouldn't do, namely he taught a black Sunday school class, little black children. The reason that's so significant is because that one little thing that he did there, years later in England, when he had come from Le Brie in Switzerland over to England to give a lecture, and the lecture was to a group of OM, Operation Mobilization, kids coming over, college kids, Bible school students coming over from America, and one of them was black. One. This black guy was sitting there, and Schaeffer started, and he said, his name was Sylvester Jacobs. He said he didn't understand a word from the word go until Schaeffer recalled and used as an illustration this Sunday school teaching with these black kids. And he said, we were able to talk to one another as human beings. And that sentence so riveted and so went home to Sylvester Jacobs that he sought him out afterwards, and a relationship developed. And this fella came over to L'Abri, and his senses of inferiority as a black person were gradually lifted through the affirmation that he received there at L'Abri, and he went on to become a well-known photographer, evidently, who's still working. What that made me think about is this lesson, because I've seen it in my own life. Never begrudge the small things the Lord brings into your life to do, especially as you're moving along and dreaming of other things that you might want to do. I just look back at my life as a seminary student. My first ministry duty was the 7th grade class at Lake Avenue Church in Pasadena. For a year, I taught a class of 7th grade boys. I guess it was a half a year. And then they graduated me to the 9th grade. And so for a whole year, I taught junior high boys. And here I was studying philosophy and theology and Greek and Hebrew. And then on the weekends, I took about 3 hours to get my lesson plan ready for those boys on Sunday morning. And I would work real hard, and I'd make drawings and timelines and everything. And I took it real seriously. And I think the Lord honored that. I think He did. I think He said, all right, you have proved yourself faithful in this 1 year's commitment. I will now make you faithful in teaching Greek at Fuller. And so Dr. Lazor asked me if I would help him teach Greek the summer after that. And that to me was like a gift in response to faithfulness in what might look like the little thing. Because here, a little thing proved the liberation of a man, 20 years later? I don't know how many years later it was. So you just never know where God is schooling you for something very, very important. And it may seem small and insignificant now, and will be used wonderfully in the years to come. He graduated from Hampton, Sydney, and went on to Westminster Seminary. That's where David Livingstone went. He married Edith that summer, 1935, and they had 3 daughters in America, Priscilla, Susan, and Debbie. And then Frankie was born in 1952 over in Switzerland, who's making a name for himself now. He didn't last long or stay long at Westminster Seminary because there were big church splits going on in those days. The Orthodox Presbyterians had split off from the Presbyterian USA and formed Westminster, and then the Bible Presbyterians split off from the Orthodox Presbyterians and formed Faith, and he followed the split right on to its limit there at Faith Theological Seminary in Indiana, and that's where he graduated as a Bible Presbyterian and took a church and was ordained in 1938. It's interesting to me that his pastorates were short. His first pastorate was from 38 to 41, so 3 years. His second pastorate was from 41 to 43 in Chester, Pennsylvania. That's 2 years. And then he went to St. Louis. And in 1947, that's 4 years later, he's very restless. They had helped start Children for Christ in that area, and he became very fascinated with Europe and wondering what the evangelical movement was like in Europe. And he asked for a study leave or a leave of absence, and his denomination sent him in 1947 over the summer months to just travel around Europe and see what God was doing and to speak as occasion allowed. And that's what he did. And he met Martin Lloyd-Jones, and they became good friends. And both of them were very conservative in their commitment to Scripture, and they're wanting to sound the alarm all over Europe that the ecumenical movement in those days was compromising a lot of doctrinal integrity, and they were both firmly fixed in being against that. Well, he went back, and there was a call to Europe in his bones. They were released from their church and sent as missionaries by the Bible Presbyterian Church to Europe. He traveled around Europe, settled in Switzerland, started a Children for Christ there, and preached all over Europe, became known for being a real hardliner on biblical orthodoxy and anti-ecumenical and anti-liberal. And then he had an experience, the hayloft experience. This was the experience that gave birth to L'Abri and changed the rest of his life. I'll read a couple of paragraphs here. In 1951, the family moved to Chalet Bijou, or whatever you pronounce that in French, still in Champéry. In its hayloft, Francis Schaeffer was to have a major spiritual crisis, without which he maintained he would never have been able to start the work of L'Abri. He had felt a strong burden to stand for the historical Christian position and for the purity of the visible church. Now he was suddenly struck with the problem of reality. The fact that so many Orthodox Christians exhibited so few of the fruits that the Bible so clearly says should be the result of Christianity. He realized that his own faith was now less real to him than at his conversion. I had to go back and rethink my whole position. I told Edith that for the sake of honesty, I had to go all the way back to my agnosticism and think through the whole matter. He paced around in the mountains and in the hayloft of their chalet. I walked, prayed, and thought through what the Scriptures taught, as well as reviewing my own reasons for becoming a Christian. I saw again that there were totally sufficient reasons to know that the infinite personal God does exist and that Christianity is true. In going further, I saw something else that made a profound difference in my life. I searched through the Bible, what it said concerning reality as a Christian. And gradually, I saw that the problem was that with all the teaching I had received, I had heard little of what the Bible says concerning the meaning of the finished work of Christ for our present lives. That was the real basis of L'Abri.
This is Light and Truth, God-centered preaching to help you see Christ clearly and treasure Him truly. I'm your host, Dan Kruver. Thank you for listening. On our next episode, John Piper concludes our two-part series, Confronting Despair, Francis Schaeffer's Answer to Existential Angst, with a talk titled, The God Who Is There. I hope you'll join us. For more resources, visit desiringgod.org.